Thank you for joining us today. This is our ARIS office hours, and it's, as you might have imagined, a way to learn about different topics, ask questions, have a nice lively discussion about our monthly topic. Today, we have Diane Doberneck here from Michigan State University to join us, and we're so happy because we love Diane here at ARIS. She's been a good friend of ours, and she will be talking to you about graduate students, outreach, engagement, broader impacts, all those things. And we welcome your questions and your thoughts as she finishes her presentation. If you'd like to add some thoughts in the chat, or if you'd like to ask questions in the chat, by all means. And then afterwards, we can also open it up a little bit too. But I'm going to give more time to Diane. She can talk a little bit about what she does and what she's going to talk about today. And thank you again for coming. Diane.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm a big fan of ARIS too, so that respect is mutual. Welcome everybody on a Thursday afternoon, which is probably actually Wednesday where you are. I don't know what day I'm on here. Let me just move forward here. So I wanted to say a little bit about myself. Like many of you, I wear many different hats. And so some of the hats that I feel are relevant for the conversation today about graduate students and professional development around outreach and engagement and broader impacts are these three hats. I'm currently the Director for Faculty and Professional Development in MSU's Office of Public Engagement and Scholarship. So like that's completely a mouthful. But part of what I do there is I do single topic workshops. I do multi-day institutes or intensives. And then I also do some more kind of informal, like holding the space for what we call write-ins, writing retreats, and even co-working time. So people who are working on the scholarly parts of their work that need a dedicated time and space to put on their calendar, we provide that as part of our office. And very often we have graduate students take advantage of those co-work times. One of my other hats is I am the coordinator of the MSU Graduate Certification in Community Engagement. This is our 12th year of having a fresh cohort every year come in. I'll tell you a little bit more about that program. And then in association with that program, for 6 years, I've been part of the advisory board, the advisory committee for the Sea Grant Extension Research Fellows. Again, I'm going to tell you more about that. And then we're on year 2 of a 5-year award from NSF NIH that was awarded to Bowling Green State University. And then I am on the community engagement core, kind of subcontracted out. So many different hats. I've picked the hats that have to do with STEM fields, outreach, engagement, broader impacts, and the teaching and learning that I do in those areas. So let me just kind of tell you some more. When I have been thinking about professional development, which is what PD means on this slide, for graduate students, there is really kind of like 2 tracks of opportunities available to students. There's a track where people establish classes and courses. They might be special topics courses or one class or a series of classes. And then there's a track that's not for credit. These are learning opportunities students take in addition to their master's thesis or their dissertation program plans. And I'm going to focus today on my remarks mostly on the not for credit type of professional development. I found at our institution, graduate students can work in those opportunities into their program plan and find time to do them a little bit more easily than they can find 6 or 9 or 12 credits in their program plan. And in particular today, I'm going to talk about some examples that I have been part of that are either institutes, fellows programs, or certifications. So it kind of gives you a little bit of a map. And then I will also kind of share with you that there are like low time investment programming, mid time investment programming, and high time investment programming. And I'm going to give you some examples of the mids and the highs. And I'm not going to talk very much about the low part. Having said that, with one of my other hats on, I do some of that low time investment programming, and in questions and answers, if people are interested, I would be really happy to kind of say more about that. But that's not really where I'm going to focus things today. I will also make available the slides that I'm sharing in case people would like any of the citations or to look at anything. And I will also kind of, I think I'll put a handout in the chat a little bit later. So that's kind of where we're going. I'd like to talk to you about four programs I'm part of or familiar with. And then I'm going to talk to you about some cross-cutting lessons learned that you might take back as you think about how you're crafting professional development for graduate students. So let me talk about something near and dear to my heart, which is the graduate certification and community engagement. This would be considered one of those high involvement, high amount of time programs. Students may join as PhD or master's students. It's open to MSU students only. And if you can take a look at the top little description there, we've got 17 two-hour workshops. We've got a 60-hour project. They write a portfolio and they give a talk about that portfolio. And when they complete all of those things, they get an academic credential on their official academic transcript. So it's got a fair amount of heft in it. And our on-campus partners include my office, the Office of University Outreach and Engagement, and then our graduate school. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about that program, we put together a journal article that talks about the competencies that we really emphasize in this program. And let me show you a quick page about what that looks like. What am I doing here? Okay. And I hope your screens are big enough. If not, you know, we can look at this a little bit closer when you get it. These are the 20 key areas we think people need to know a lot about. And we organize them into 8 dimensions. These are things that community engaged graduate students, whether they're doing research, whether they're doing like science outreach teaching, whether they're doing technical assistance and consulting, really kind of need to be familiar with these key spots. And so we built our program to emphasize them. I am going to then continue to show this a little bit. So after that program was up and going for about 6 years, Sea Grant Extension approached our office about whether we could partner together to develop a fellows program that would be managed by Sea Grant Extension, but that would go hand in hand with the graduate certification and community engagement. And so this is a really interesting development. What that means is students apply to be a Sea Grant Research Fellow, Sea Grant Extension Research Fellow, and then they take part in cohort meetings through Sea Grant Extension. They participate in the graduate certification and community engagement. They have professional job shadows on the Sea Grant Extension side, and there's a fellowship and a stipend. What I was able to do in partnering with the graduate school again on this, Sea Grant Extension, and my Office of University Outreach and Engagement is kind of marry an existing professional development program with some additional activities. And so what Sea Grant Extension Research Fellows get is they get to go to Sea Grant Extension meetings. They get to kind of see what stakeholder meetings and multi-day workshops look like. They get to talk with other people who are interested in that particular topical area of outreach and engagement and broader impacts. And so it's like they get the grad certificate plus some extra bonus activities. It's been really great to kind of work this partnership through. And I'm super excited to say that just a few months ago, we had this publication come out in Fisheries talking about that program. This would be considered more of a mid-level program, but then you add the graduate certification and then it's more of a high-level program. Let me tell you about another program I'm part of. This we also published in the same journal article. This was done in partnership, as you can see at the bottom, with NOAA, U.S. Department of Commerce, the Regents of the University of Michigan, which is where Sea Grant Extension was located for the state of Michigan at the time. We put together what we considered a mid-level program, which was a week-long, pretty much, institute about community engagement for people interested in Great Lakes water issues. So we started half day on Monday, we ended half day on Friday. We had 14 sessions. We held it off campus at a nature center. We had a community partner that was like a keynote speaker one of the evenings. All meals happened together, all hotel and travel were paid for by the funders. So we did this one time. It was a super exciting experience. And I can tell you a little bit more about the content. This is what that content looked like. We took that basic set of competency areas from the graduate certificate program, and then we worked with an advisory committee. And we said, which ones of these seem important to you? Which ones do you think, given who our students are and our learners are, would you drop? What is missing from this list for this particular set of learners? And what we came up with were some additional suggestions. We wanted more case studies. So we had a research case study, a science and policy case study, and then our community partners presented a management-oriented case study. We wanted more on facilitating meetings and facilitative leadership. And so we invited in a speaker for that. And you can see from places where the stars are missing, so let's say right here, 13 and 14 does not have a green star, that would mean we dropped that topic for this institute. One of the things that was super helpful is that as we looked at the main competency areas, we thought a lot about what does that mean for our scientists who are doing research on Great Lakes water issues, coastal communities, climate change, fisheries issues, and how could we bolster examples and content throughout all of the workshops, in addition to adding these case studies that were full examples. That worked really well. Let me tell you about the next example. This example followed a very similar pattern to the Sea Grant Extension Institute I just talked to you about. This happened last summer. Yes, last summer. Again, very similar model. We had a half day Monday. We met the whole week. We had a half day on Friday. That allowed for travel time. We met in person. We had 16 sessions, and we were located at a state park in Ohio that had kind of like a conference center as part of the state park. It's really pretty nice. And we were right on Lake Erie, also pretty important. Again, our funders helped pay for hotel and travel and meals. We had a field trip. So that session was led by a community partner, but we actually went to the community partner site and had a tour of the water treatment plant in Toledo, Ohio, where they really had to work very hard on how to mitigate and manage the water supply for Toledo when the harmful algal bloom happened several years ago that spoiled the water supply. So this was open to master's students, PhD students, postdocs, extension professionals. We drew people from a lot of Ohio and some of Michigan, but they had to have an interest in harmful algal blooms because that was what our grant's about. That is where we're looking to bolster outreach, engagement, science communications, and understand and help train up these up and coming graduate students who are getting fantastic science training, but aren't in their regular courses and lab work getting as much outreach, engagement, and communications training. So following a similar format, we took that basic set of competencies, and then we had an advisory committee, but we did something in addition to that. We did a very informal needs assessment. We put together a list of everything we could brainstorm about research, community engaged research around harmful algal blooms, everything around teaching and learning, everything about science communications, everything about policy. We had these huge, huge lists. And then we thought about who our potential learners would be and who were advisors of those graduate students and postdocs. And we sent them an email survey. And we said, tell us in these big piles of ideas, which ones you think are most important for us to touch upon, and which ones would you leave behind? And so, again, starting with that basic set of competencies, and then asking, what should we drop and what should we add? So you'll see we've got stars in some of the same spots. Partnerships are really important. Research is really important. Talking to public audience is really important down there at number 17. But from that needs assessment, we ended up focusing on 3 sessions on partnership building, 1 on community engaged teaching and learning, 3 on community engaged science research. And then we really, really significantly expanded out the communications part. So we had 4 separate sessions, including policymakers. We had a panel with journalists. We had people from newspapers. We actually had someone from a television station. We had someone to come in and talk about using social media. And we had a documentary filmmaker who was an outstanding presenter talking about the power of video to tell your science story. And then, as I mentioned, we had a field trip to the water treatment plant. And the field trips, as I'm sure you can imagine, on the evaluations came back very, very high. And I think our water treatment plant professionals were happy to be involved in educating up and coming professionals about what they need to have as information from scientists. So it was really kind of a win-win from the student learning perspective, but also from a community partner perspective, valuing their information needs and their perspective. Okay. One of the things I think is really important in these kinds of talks, when I basically say, I did this, I did that, I did this, I did that, is that there's a pause where I step back and kind of reflect on some take-home messages or some cross-cutting themes that you might consider in your own context. Because you might not be at an institution that has Sea Grant as a partner, and that might not be, a Sea Grant Research Institute might not be your thing. But there's some lessons learned I can share that might be helpful. So a couple slides about that. In every instance, the graduate certification in community engagement, the Sea Grant Fellows, the Sea Grant Research Institute, and I'm going to just call it the Harmful Algal Blooms Research Institute. We consulted existing literature about graduate student professional development. We used one model, but we looked at other models as we went. We collaborated with both on and on-campus partners for funding, for contributions to those advisory committees or needs assessments, and to help give us case studies and specifics. We customized all of the professional development to specific groups of learners, what they were interested in. We customized case studies, we customized examples, we customized readings. We thought specifically up front, is this an opportunity for a low involvement, a mid involvement, or a high involvement or engagement program? And in the 4 examples I gave you, we really focused on a couple that are mid and a couple that are high. And I think from a teaching and learning perspective, those probably have more impact than a once-off, workshop here, workshop there. Having said that, I think some of our graduate students only have time for a once-off workshop every so often. And so please don't think I'm disparaging like low involvement programming. Other cross-cutting practices. The tailored case studies were a hit. Experiential learning activities. Many of our talks weren't really talks, they were workshops where there was a little talking and active learning activities. We had lightning talks where people came in and you rotated around and heard different practices from community partners. We did a lot of different types of active learning. We also structured reflection, and I think we could have made a little bit more of an emphasis on, so you've heard this concept today, when you take that home and think about your work, how might you put that into practice? I think that's a really important thing to do. We involve community partners. I think we have the most examples in the Harmful Algal Blooms training in Ohio. We had multiple community partners give presentations. They ate lunch with our learners on different days. It wasn't just our field trip. We actually had people from a public health department in Ohio come talk to us. And I think for some of our bench researchers that are dealing with harmful algal blooms, they've never really talked to anyone on the public health side. Their information that they generate from their monitoring does get used for public health alerts, but they've never actually had an opportunity to hear from a public health official what they have as information needs. And so that was a really important moment for community partners and the students to kind of be in the same room at the same time. I think, as you can imagine, personally, I'm a big fan of planning your program with specific goals and a framework in mind, evaluating it both to improve practice. Boy, you know, the graduate certificate program, we're in our 12th year. It doesn't really remotely resemble year 1 and 2. We have, through evaluations, really learned our way into better content, better teaching and learning, better ways of mentoring and advising our students. And so evaluation is really your friend when it comes to that kind of thing. And if you're using a scholarly framework and you're collecting the data, you can publish your program details and your results, which then helps all the rest of us have things to think about and look at and try on and modify. And I know that not everybody thinks about publishing about their professional development offerings, but it actually is something you can do. In addition to the piece that we have in fisheries about Sea Grant Extension and the Sea Grant Extension Institute, fellows in the Institute, we have a forthcoming piece in a journal of water research and outreach on the harmful algal blooms. So like each of these has generated publications. So when we send this along to you, here are some of the citations for those publications. And I think I'm going to stop there for right now and see what questions people have. I've been talking for a terribly long time without taking questions. So, thoughts, ideas, comments?
Diane, I have one.
Yeah.
This is Julie Rizian from Oregon State University.
Hi.
Hi. I'm curious if any of these programs have intersected with things like the IGERT program from NSF or the National Research Traineeship and RT programs, where people have been able to take maybe not the entirety of the certificate or the program, but the competencies and work with them, or if you've had that opportunity to connect them to any of the NSF funded opportunities.
So we haven't directly made that connection. There are other parts of our campus that are writing those grants and managing the IGERT funding. But what we do have is we have some of those students that then get like cross-referred over to us, right? So there would be students in the graduate certificate program that would be part of IGERT, or there would be students that are, we had that, one of the first publications I put up there was FAST Fellows. We've had funding for our FAST Fellows program, and some of the FAST Fellows have been referred over to my office. I am super open to that. I think part of what seems to happen on my campus is it's a very big campus. People kind of are working in their own lane, and there isn't as much like merging and crossing over as there could be. And I see that as a little bit of a missed opportunity. So I think maybe part of on those lessons learned, it would be to figure out who else on your campus is doing some of this work and kind of grow some of those networks. And I will say Sea Grant Extension has come through that kind of network building. The FAST Fellows that have come in has come through that network building. So it's kind of probably at some point pretty soon that's going to happen. Good question. What else are people curious about? Yeah, Craig.
So my name's Craig Ogilvie, and I'm at the other MSU, Montana State University. I'm wondering if you have any examples of, I don't want to say smaller scale initiatives, but I'm thinking we have some very active graduate student organizations that are involved in various community outreach engagement efforts. And currently, I'm not really supporting them in any intentional way. And so I don't have a clear path for those graduate student organizations to develop skills on communication. It's just sort of a bit of a wild west. I know it's a concern. I don't have a solution.
Right, right. So we have a couple graduate student organizations on our campus that I would say over the past 5 years have grown in number. So each organization itself has a larger membership. They've become more active, and their leadership has not just provided leadership for their organization, but they're also starting themselves to lead activities around learning about outreach and engagement, science communications. So it's very interesting. Every year I reach out, we have I'm gonna get the names wrong, but we have two. We have like a one that's like Women in Science group, and that one is growing and really flourishing. And then we have another one that's like a science communications group, and there's overlap in those memberships. And so one of the things that I do is I reach out and ask, hey, what are your plans for the year? What are you working on? Are there things that my office could do some workshops for? Are there workshops and trainings and opportunities you're leading that then you would like me to provide some publicity for? And so what I'm trying to be very careful about is not squashing their leadership, right? On the other hand, there's often turnover. That's not the same president every year. Some years the organization is stronger, and some years the organization kind of flounders. And so I also don't want to like have that be a brand new responsibility on my plate. You saw the stack of hats. I don't need another hat, but I want to be a friendly partner. And I did that reach out just like 2 weeks ago. Hi, how's your semester looking? What have you laid out for the year? Are there topics you could use some help on? We might have resources for you. And so we have been doing some back and forth that way. And we, in my office very often, we'll do a workshop for, we're doing one in a couple of weeks if Miles is on. Miles McNall from my office is doing one for our AGAP group. And so we do some of that. I think, this is my opinion, this is just Diane talking on a Wednesday afternoon in office hours. I think it's fantastic that there's this bubbling up of graduate student interest and enthusiasm, and they like want to go do this. And so I think my hope is that if that starts bubbling up on your campuses, you find ways to be supportive in ways that you can without taking on or taking over. I don't know if I answered your question. It's okay? All right. All right. Other questions or thoughts? I can kind of see most of you all at once.
Hey, sorry, I have a question. I'm Marianne. I'm at the University of Washington.
Hi, Marianne.
Hi, thank you. I am wondering how you, if you've seen any really good examples of adapting some of your educational opportunities for the virtual format. We're not allowed to meet in person, and so if you've seen if you have any advice on that recently, I'm gearing up to do similar training programs this year. And
I do have advice on that. We are also not allowed to meet in person right now, mostly. And one of the hats I didn't talk about is that I do some outreach and engagement, science facilitation, community engagement training for our state Department of Natural Resources Wildlife Division. Follow that along. So these are state employees who are professionals who deal with the public on land management and deer and wildlife things. And I typically do a week-long summer workshop for them, which we got thrown out the window because of COVID. And we really had a conversation about, do we have that cohort of people we recruited who were interested, who had engagement issues they needed some time to workshop and think through? Do we just let them go for a whole year? And we thought probably not. And so we took some key elements of what we typically teach in person and really reworked them for an online space. And so I did, what did we do? An hour and a half in the morning, a 2-hour lunch break, and an hour and a half in the afternoon. And we, in those hour and a half blocks, we reworked the curriculum. So in about every 20 minutes, something happened. So like, maybe we started with use your cell phone to type in how you're feeling today about engagement. But you know, you get things like it's frustrating or time consuming. And then we made a word cloud out of that using poll everywhere. People just texted one word and then it showed up on the PowerPoint slide. So about every 20 minutes, we broke out a chunk of the curriculum into a piece that fine. And then we had some type of activity, whether it was a small group discussion, whether it was a new person who showed up and told a case study story. We talked about a spectrum of outreach to engagement, and then we broke them into teams and gave them small examples of their own work and asked them to place them on that spectrum. We had another online activity we used where we asked people to kind of think who their stakeholders are or who their public audiences would be. And we used some online brainstorming stuff. So it's possible to do it and to transform it. It took some time to do that. And I think we got really good results. People really enjoyed it. And like the graduate certification, I think we're on workshop 5 for the year. Everything has been online so far. And I'm trying to use that same, you know, every 20 minutes or so, do some completely different thing to kind of, you know, get people out of just tuning out because they've been on Zoom too long, and to have a chance to talk amongst themselves about the content you've just delivered. So those are a few examples. You know, I think it would be really interesting if other people here on the call, I think there are about 27 of us, I'm sure someone else has had to transform what would have been in-person trainings to an online format. Are there other suggestions for Marianne? I see breakout rooms in the chat. I will also say I'm participating in a training about engagement. And the organizers of that have talked to key leaders in the field and have taken like kind of an interview approach. And so they've pre-recorded maybe a 5, 8, 10-minute interview so it's like one person interviewing and then the person talking. And then those have been kind of saved for people to kind of look at ahead of time and view. And because it's kind of an interview style, it's really, really focused on a key question that has to do with that moment in the curriculum. And those have been kind of nice. They've broadened who the teachers are, because that person might not be available like live, but they might be available at some point for an 8-minute interview. And so we've been able to really bolster up the diversity of the presentation team by inviting these presenters in these little tiny video snippets into the curriculum. And I think there's a lot of merit there. If you're not reading the chat, let me point out breakout rooms, mural, Google Documents. Oh, using the annotate function in Zoom, which I think so many people still don't know exists. But if you Google annotate function in Zoom, it'll talk you through how to make that into a participatory thing. In-person orientation into a Canvas course. And again, I see these short videos, discussions, and quizzes. And then a happy hour or informal hangout. I have to say personally, I think that's one of the things that's hardest for me to replicate in an online situation. When we're together at a conference, you stand in line with someone at the coffee table or at the lunch buffet, or you walk in and out of the parking lot with someone, and those little informal conversations sometimes lead to really great connections. And I do worry a little bit about graduate students missing out on that element of the informal curriculum. Oh, and I see here that in the chat, the Center for Scientific Communication and Community Engagement has some blogs on different different tools. So there's great ideas happening in the chat. Nice link there to that, to those tools and recaps. Other questions people have? I guess I'll ask a question to all of you then. If you think about the types of programming you're likely to pull together for your graduate students, does it feel like it's more like it's a like a shorter kind of thing? So like a one-off workshop or a series of 1 or 2, or are you thinking of something like a little more extensive with, it's either like multi-day or a fellows program? You know, maybe in the chat, let me know where people feel like most of their efforts are going, if it's kind of shorter term trainings or more longer term and involved trainings. I'd be really curious to know kind of collectively where people's heads are with this in their practice. Yeah, so I see some shorter term efforts that have the potential to grow into something a little more medium term. Shorter term trainings for managers or organizers. A 6-section, 2 hours, and continuing education credits, but still in a transcript. I think that's really great. I think there's a lot of potential to really target in a shorter term training for who your participants are and the exact type of need or competency they have, and really kind of be more in depth on that. And I think that there's a lot to be done in that area. Oh, and I like this medium investment is tailored towards grad students, postdocs, and faculty. What I will say in the examples I shared with you, the Sea Grant Research Institute and the HABS Institute, those ones that were both week-longs, they had a mixture of people in them. We had mostly graduate students, but we had postdocs, we had staff, we had some extension staff that were in the mixture. And there is something really nice to have that mixture sometimes. Yeah. So question, how to create a structure for short to medium term in each of several departments. Yep. This is really great. Nancy said, ask them what they want and then help them organize what works for them. So, you know, both that advisory committee that gave us input had some graduate students on it, and our informal needs assessment was sent to advisors, but also we had some grad students in that mix. I can't echo that enough. I think sometimes our students often have a really good idea of what in particular they want to learn, and we sometimes forget to ask them that. Yeah. Other thoughts or questions? And then I do have kind of a closing idea. Maybe I'll share that with you now. I have noticed in the past 4 or 5 years, just a groundswell of interest among our graduate students for having experiences working in community with their work, working with partners. They are interested in understanding outreach and engagement, both in terms of making their science accessible to people, but to have it make a difference beyond the contribution of science itself. They want to talk with up and coming students of color to inspire them to be scientists, or they want to help out a local K-12 school in the curriculum. The groundswell is really significant from my perspective. So in my 12 years at Michigan State, where we've had our graduate certification student, I would say in years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we may have had 1 or 2 STEM students, like hardly any at all. And this year I have 40 students in my program, and I would say 10 of them are from STEM fields that have deep commitments to doing outreach and engagement and already have experience doing it. I should also add that they're not coming in as blank slates, but they've done some of this as their master's work or as summer experiences. And so it's very exciting for me to see that change in our student body and our student population. And it's, I think, a really important opportunity for all of us to help connect those students to bigger national organizations that can help them grow and change as scholars and as, you know, science educators. So helping them find the ARIS website, helping them understand resources that are put together at CASE, helping them figure out professional societies that welcome science and the outreach and engagement pieces, and helping coach and mentor them in talking about that work, I think is really, really important. And sometimes those aren't conversations their major professors or their advisors are having with them. I like there's some more examples in here about fellows programs. Yeah, I like this too, hearing that graduate student organizations are reaching out to help facilitate workshops. I think these are really great suggestions. These are great. Other thoughts or comments people have?
Oh, this is Julie again from Oregon State. I guess one point of connection I'm curious about, and I've been starting to think about as you're talking here, is the Center for Integration of Research, Teaching, and Learning, CIRTL, which has pretty heavy activity at University of Wisconsin-Madison, but I think also MSU might have been a member in the past, and my university had been a member. So a lot of those programs have resulted in these graduate student teaching certification programs. So teaching future scholars actually how to teach. It is amazing, still feels like a novel thing. But one of the outcomes at our own institutional implementation of membership in CIRTL was that we created a graduate student certificate in teaching. Mm-hmm. And it's similar things. Students that were kind of liberal arts college destined are the ones who started it. And now there's a lot more STEM students involved. And a lot of them are coming to it because they want to be good at that part of their work. And then one of the outcomes that we're seeing in that program is people saying, you know, planning to go to industry, planning to never teach, but also going to the program because they're starting to get this like street credit for learning how to communicate, like pedagogy as a pathway to communicating about science in any kind of situation across disciplines, or, you know, with policymakers or whatever. So I'm just kind of curious about those kinds of connections, if some of those things are emerging there, because I could see a lot of this of similar pathways that this could open up for people who may never actually do any engagement work.
Right, right. Great question. We have two different types of certificate programs for college teaching, which I find probably confusing from a student's perspective. We have one that is the credit path, where if you take these 3 courses and earn your 9 credits, you get this certification in college teaching. And then we have one that's a non-credit path, like my certificate program is, where if you go to this 2-day boot camp, have a mentored experience that's approved, write a portfolio, an electronic portfolio, it will show up on your transcript. So we actually have 2 of those things floating around on my campus, and it's great to have choices. They just unfortunately pretty much have almost the exact same name. But what I find is that there are students that are interested in the college teaching certificate and in my certificate program. And then the question is, where do we find the overlaps? Can the project for that one be the project for mine? And can we kind of work that through? Which the extent to which we can work that through, I'm happy to do that. I think finding overlaps for graduate students is a pretty seriously significant and helpful thing. I haven't heard students articulate an interest in having this broader basis of skills so they can then use that as a pathway into industry. It is not surprising. That makes total sense to me. I just haven't had anyone actually say that to me. And so I don't know if that's just not a way I framed the conversation, so that could be part of it, although I'm not quite sure about that. But it makes me want to kind of call up some people and ask some questions here on my campus to see, you know, is that part of what's happening too?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's this like anything about, you know, I mean, research practice partnerships, engaged scholarship, all of these things, they kind of boil down to just like being a good citizen who's trying to look at how do we get the thing done with all the people and expertise we can get at the table. You know, a lot of it boils down to, I mean, I think that's kind of like a social scientist dilemma in general, which is like, duh, but, but you know, these processes of systematizing, it's interesting. And, you know, in ARIS, we're building kind of partnership modules as well. And that's, as you know, I think, Diane, all those things, a lot of it boils down to the same types of skills, you know, and some of the really basic ones, the listening, the intellectual humility, some of those really basic skills that I think you can also bring to teaching. But yeah, I'm curious.
Sure.
I'm curious if the future develops in that way where sort of learning these engagement competencies becomes, you know, just something that helps any professional.
Oh, I, you know, kind of in the closing graduate certificate workshop, like the very last one, we talk about some work that's been done in the business field about kind of old economy jobs and new economy jobs, about like the characteristics of boundary spanners and people who work in like more network society. And it's so fascinating. There are a couple of kind of compare and contrast columns where like, this is, you know, very simplified, the old way and the new way, completely for the business field, Harvard Business Review kinds of stuff. And when you look at the new column of like new skill sets and mindsets and practices, every single item is a community engagement item. It's partnership building, it's working across like layers of hierarchy, it's valuing diversity. Like you just go down, and I kind of like to end on that because I like them to know that no matter where their path eventually takes them, there are places where that's going to be really, really valued. And look, this whole other field we don't have a lot of students from is already saying this is what our future looks like. And it's like you're well prepared as an engagement person to be successful in a lot of different directions you might go. So that's a great point. Other thoughts or comments or things I can help bounce ideas off of, or questions that you can give me that I can go back and work on, because I appreciate that every time. Yeah, the old and the new, I'll look that up, and as I send my 3 pieces on, I'll make a note to send that on, so that can get shared out. I'll make my little sticky now. Well, if there aren't more questions or you don't have more things you're kind of, let's ask Diane something. I am really just honored. Oh yeah, Craig, you have one?
Yeah, so since we've got a few minutes, I know it's been a long Zoom anyway, but on my campus is a lot of focus on undergraduate engagement, and I have not yet really reached out to connect into that group. And I didn't see it in the things that you've been suggesting. Do you know of any examples where that's worked well?
Well, I think Penn State's doing a great job of thinking about engagement for undergraduates. And I had put this together to maybe share. Let me show you this picture. You know, if our conversation took us this direction. So one thing, Penn State University has been talking about undergraduate engagement. Keep in mind that part of how they frame that is those high impact learning practices.
Right.
And part of how they frame it is working with partners beyond the border of campus. So when you hear them use that word, you kind of have to scratch below the surface to figure out which engagement they mean in terms of which engagement you mean. But they've been working very, very hard with their undergraduate population, and they have a pretty dynamic office focused on that. One of the things that I had a conversation with in advance of these office hours was this idea of kind of scaffolded mentoring as you're thinking about engagement and helping people think about how this work works. And so this idea that you might have a PI on a grant that has graduate students and postdocs that's working for her, and then they, in addition, have some undergraduates that are part of the lab or the group doing work. They're being mentored by the graduate students, and the whole group then is kind of working towards doing some type of K-12 outreach. I think that this is kind of a really interesting thing to consider. Part of what is happening in these little light blue arrows isn't just how do we take our scientific topic, you know, Great Lakes ecology, harmful algal blooms, and translate that and teach that in a way that from the PI that makes sense to the grad students, from the grad students that makes sense to the undergrads, how that makes sense to the K-12 students. Like how do we make that work at the different levels? But you're also mentoring them on how to mentor them, mentoring them on how to mentor and engage in teaching and learning with this portion. So they're kind of two flows of what that good conversation is about, and kind of a scaffolding, broader impacts kind of mentoring model. And I think it would be really fascinating to hear some examples of how labs and PIs have really worked very effectively kind of across these levels to create kind of their own little learning ecology of how they're passing that information on, which is separate from your question, I guess, because you were asking me mostly about undergrads.
Yeah.
But I think there's like our office has a group that works for graduate students and a group that works for undergraduates. And like that little stitching between the two is very, very loose on my campus. And I think there's just great potential for that to be a little more tightly pulled together.
Yeah, that's my sense. I have a sense there's an opportunity here. I just haven't had the wisdom or perhaps the time to really build enough connections across that. And a lot of the community engagement professionals here on campus are really geared to how to help the undergraduates work better with communities. And I feel like I want to raise graduate students into their horizon as well.
Right. Maybe start small, maybe just have a conversation and see if there's just a small way that could happen. You know, we've got a graduate research poster fair that happens every spring, and I've often wondered the extent to which it's graduate students mentoring the undergrads for that competitive fair, or if it's actually PIs and faculty doing that mentoring. And I'm not really quite clear, but that would be a really good spot. A graduate student probably knows a lot to help with that. Just, you know, maybe start small. Is there anything else I can help people think about today? I will send a few things on to the organizers so you have access. It was great talking with everybody and seeing a whole bunch of new names I haven't met before. I hope our paths continue to cross and you continue to send me really good questions. I like that.
Thank you, Diane.
You're welcome.